And welcome to Integrated Pest Management. Today, with the assistance of Jane Collier, I will discuss the definition of Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, and what it means to you, the home gardener. Here are some things I hope you take away from today's presentation. To know the definition of Integrated Pest Management, to understand the 5 components you use to employ Integrated Pest Management, to learn how to identify a pest, to learn how to select an appropriate management practice, and then evaluate, monitor, and adjust the IPM strategies you have employed.
Hello, Cheryl. I am really glad that you're going to talk about this subject today because it is something that we all need to know. But can you tell me exactly what does IPM mean?
Great question, Jane, and one that we all ask. When people always used to make presentations when I was an early gardener and they'd say IPM, I mean, just kind of glaze over. It was like, what do you mean IPM? So I'm going to attempt to explain it in a way that seems appropriate for home gardeners. Integrated pest management is a science-based approach to managing pests, and you use a variety of safe, sustainable, and effective tactics. It might mean hand-picking insects off a plant. It might mean digging up a plant to remove it from a space where it is not thriving at all and move it to a space where more of its needs are being met. It might also mean spraying your rose bushes with a blast of water to remove those aphids.
Well, Cheryl, when you're talking about the pests, are you only talking about bugs?
So glad you asked that. In this context of IPM, pests are organisms that damage desirable plants or impact human or animal health. Pests may transmit disease, or they might just be a nuisance, such as a mole. A pest can be a plant, a weed, a vertebrate, like a bird, a rodent, or other mammal, an invertebrate, such as insects, ticks, mites, or snails, or a nematode or pathogen, like a bacteria, virus, or fungus that can cause diseases.
Well, can you tell me how would I go about implementing IPM?
Absolutely. IPM focuses on the long-term prevention of pests or their damage by managing your garden environment. It uses an overall strategy of prevention before a problem comes up. It goes beyond controlling one kind of pest, and it does require a deeper understanding of pest and plant biology. You know, we're all kind of used to this. I see that insect, I'm going to spray it. That's a pest management approach that's been common in previous decades, but which we wish to avoid to minimize the use of those sprays. Integrated pest management is comprised of 5 components. Number 1, you will monitor and assess your garden for pest numbers or pest damage, and that means, of course, when I use the word pest, I mean it could be an environmental problem, it could be a fungus, it could be a disease the plant has, or it could be an insect. And then key is correctly identifying that pest. That's the only way you'll be able to properly manage that or come up with a management strategy. And then set a threshold for when your management action is needed. Use a combination of biological, cultural, physical, and chemical management tools. Talk about that more later. And then evaluate the results of what you did. Did it work? Or should you try something else? Would another method be more effective?
Well, Cheryl, you mentioned that the first step is to monitor your garden. How do I go about doing that?
Let's just talk about that for a minute. Okay, this is an easy thing to do. Take your cup of coffee, and monitor means that you walk around your garden, tour it, and always be on the alert for any changes you see in your plants, in your fruit, or just general surroundings. Do you notice a pest? Do you notice a plant that's stressed? Sometimes when a plant is stressed, pests will ride in to take advantage of a vulnerable plant. Do you notice any changes in the appearance of foliage, fruit, or in the general surroundings? You don't know you have a problem until you've been out in your garden and find it. Monitoring allows you to detect problems in their very early stages, and then you can gather information and plan a management strategy. Collecting samples of the pest, whether it's damage on leaves or an insect, and a reminder, they're not all going to be insects. But in the event they are insects, here's some things that you can use. Sticky traps, pointed here on the left, a pitfall trap. And this is just a plastic cup that's sunk into the ground and the insect trots along and bloop, right into this trap. A pheromone trap is very important for specific insects. And of course, you are all probably familiar with the spotted ring Drosophila trap. If the insect or pest is large enough for you to handpick, you can place them into a container for identification. Make a note of any specific damage and the extent of the impact on the plants. That's all helpful information when you try to determine what's causing plant damage. It's quite helpful to take a photo of the damage, one up close and one from a distance, particularly if you plan to email or take your sample to the extension office for identification. Collecting damaged leaves or other damaged plant parts and put them in a plastic bag is also wise. One thing you need to ask yourself when you're observing the plant damage is whether or not a pest caused it, or is it maybe environmental damage resulting from plant stress? Or was there any activity near the plant that might cause it to be stressed? For example, too much water, too much sun or shade, pesticide or herbicide application maybe that drifted onto the plant, or disruption of the root zone. I've included here a link to the Portland Metro area hotline email for your convenience. If you have something in your yard you want to know about and you want to send to the master gardeners, that will do it.
Okay, Cheryl, that's a lot of good information. I understand monitoring now, but you said that the next step is to identify the pest. What if I find an insect, or maybe I find this strange growth on a tree and I'm not sure if it's good or bad? How do I go about identifying what it is?
First and foremost, you do need to accurately identify the pest causing that damage. Now, only 5% of identified insect species in the garden are pests. Chances are, if you see an insect, it's randomly visiting a plant, providing maybe a beneficial service like pollination or predation of a bad insect that you don't want. So you need to ID the pest, understand its life cycle, research the best timing to take action against that pest, and explore whether or not natural enemies may be present. That means you're going to have to dig and maybe look in books, maybe search on the internet, or maybe seek out a master gardener that can help you just identify what the problem is. You can collect your insect or insects in a container or your leaves that have damage and take them to the local extension office. They'll identify the insect or identify the plant damage and offer you advice on management. If you are a sleuth and you like to explore for yourself in books, you might be able to correctly determine the insect ID yourself. Then you can plan a management strategy. Remember, don't make the insects always the bad guys. It may be a disease that's causing the damage that you're seeing. Maybe it's a four-footed critter causing your plant problem. You're going to have to be a bit of a detective to find out all those things. If it's a four-footed critter, of course, it's going to require a different type of intervention, but the master gardeners at the extension office will be able to help you.
Well, now I understand that it's very important to identify the pest correctly. But so now let's say that I identified a bug. Now, what do I do next?
Okay, before we decide what to do, you need to decide the extent of your management strategy is dependent upon that tolerance to damage. So setting a threshold for how much damage you will tolerate in your garden will be your next step. Do you mind a few whole molehills in your lawn or garden? Do the deer eat too many of your plants? Is the cabbage fly larva eating all those blooms on your petunias? Determine what level of damage you will find acceptable. A few holes in some leaves might be very acceptable, but if the leaf is skeletonized, then action might be required. If the problem warrants control, select the most effective management method and the best time to use it. If the damage isn't bothersome to you, letting the problem play out for the season is a viable strategy.
All right, you talked about your threshold, but let's just say that I found a really bad bug and it was infesting my vegetables, but I want to get rid of it. I don't want it there. I want to get rid of it. Can you tell me what steps I should take to do that?
That's a concern when it's a bad bug and you have monitored, you've identified the pest, you understand its life cycle, and you verified it is an insect that needs to be eliminated. So what do? Integrated pest management uses a combination of tactics to eliminate insects or plant damage: biological, cultural, physical, and chemical management tools. It's important that you understand how to approach your particular pest problem with a solid knowledge of all the strategies and tactics available first. The best control plans might start with the very simple method, and then you can progress to include all aspects or many aspects from the management methods. Here are the management strategies divided into categories. There are cultural methods, physical mechanical methods, biological methods, and chemical methods. Let's talk more about those. Let's talk about cultural control methods first. These techniques are practices that emphasize on modifying the natural environment to reduce the potential for a pest or disease problem from the beginning. Examples include optimizing plant health by giving them proper plant care and choosing plant varieties that are resistant to insect damage. It's important that you select disease and insect-free seeds and plants. There are nurseries and suppliers who use organic methods and minimize herbicides and pesticides in their greenhouses. I've included a tag here on this one that's highlighted here. This is the kind of tag you want to see. Be safe, neonicotinoid free. This nursery grows their plants without the use of any herbicide or pesticide that has neonicotinoids in it, and you do not want those. It is very harmful to our pollinators. Select plants that are sturdy and have a well-developed root system. You know, when you're in the nursery looking around at plants and you think you see one that looks pretty robust, you can pop it out of the pot and take a look at the roots to see if the root system is well developed. That's what you want. Select disease-resistant cultivars. Now, they have been engineered to reduce the plant's susceptibility to certain insects or diseases. And of course, think of this. If deer are a problem in your garden, there are a plethora of deer-resistant plants you can put in your garden. Deer will lose their interest in browsing in your garden if things taste rather bad to them. Also, think about this. A diversity of plants will improve your garden ecosystem. So include native varieties that will allow for beneficial insects to thrive and help control pests that may impact the health of your plants. For more information on beneficial insects and how to attract them, I've attached a link here. Planting practices should include accommodations for the correct amount of proper sun or shade. You know, the right plant in the right place will go a long way toward preventing insect or disease problems. Plants should be placed into soil that has been lightly tilled and at a depth and width that accommodates the root ball. Don't plant too deeply. It will encourage disease at the soil level. Place soil firmly around the root ball, but don't step on it to push soil down on tender roots. Mulch around your newly planted specimens to maintain moisture and prevent evaporation and soil compaction. And of course, provide fertilizer as needed throughout the growing season. You can do a great deal by employing simple strategies to prevent problems in your garden beds before you even begin. For example, do not grow the same kind of vegetable in the same place every year. Planting the same crops in the same location successive years tends to increase pest problems. And many vegetables are closely related and have the same pests and diseases. So some insects hibernate in the soil or in the litter around the plants, or lay eggs in or on the host plant. So therefore use related crops on a site only once every 3 or 4 years. Now you're thinking, okay, how am I supposed to keep track of that? Well, keeping a garden journal will help you remember what you plant and where from one growing season to the next. Of course, you're going to monitor your garden for signs of too much or too little water. Remember, try to place that water in the root zone of plants. Water deeply and less frequently, not only to conserve water, but to discourage diseases. Of course, controlling weeds will eliminate competition for resources. And note any lack of blossoming or yellowing of leaves. It may indicate the need for organic or synthetic fertilizer to boost the vigor in your plants. It can also be helpful to employ companion planting. It will not only attract beneficial insects, but also fend off pests by intermingling plants that deter insects by their odor. Marigolds and garlic are two plants that act as insect repellents and may help deter insect activity. Planting nasturtiums among your squash can confuse some bugs. They'll go for the nasturtiums instead of your squash. However, I must tell you that be very careful when you read recommendations for companion planting. If they recommend planting tansy as being helpful, please don't do that. Tansy has been shown to be a problem again in the Willamette Valley, so don't plant tansy as a companion plant. And these recommendations that I just mentioned are purely anecdotal. There is no OSU Extension research that has proven that they're effective, but sometimes people really enjoy planting those things together. Certainly, you're going to always make sure that your plants have adequate and consistent water, as well as organic or synthetic fertilizers as needed. Oh, by the way, make sure you take really good care of your garden tools so that they last a long time and don't spread diseases from one plant to another. Always clean them with alcohol, mineral spirits, paint thinner, or household foaming bathroom cleaner after you've pruned plants. It's just the safest way to go. I've included a link here for maintenance and care of your garden tools.
Carol, that's a lot of really good ideas. And now let's say that I tried all the cultural methods that you mentioned, but they didn't seem to have any effect. Is there something that I should try next?
Changing strategies to eliminate an aggressive insect or disease may always be needed in IPM. IPM is not like a straight shot with a insect spray bottle. So if none of the cultural methods worked for you, you could try some physical and mechanical management methods to manipulate the habitat to deter pests from gaining access to your plants. I've shown a lot of pictures here. I already mentioned sticky traps. You know, they can be effective in catching bugs that you don't want around. Creating barriers such as floating row cover can help to exclude pest populations by preventing them from even reaching your plants. Also true for netting fruit-bearing crops to protect them from those birds that love those berries just as much as you do. Net-covered cages over young seedlings can also help prevent insect, bird, and rabbit damage. Using sticky collars around barks of a tree can prevent damage from bark-eating mammals such as voles. And pictured here are plant collars. They can be made of cardboard, tin cans, or aluminum foil, and inserted halfway into the ground, they're a pretty effective barrier to cutworm. And of course, you all know this, but the most effective way to prevent deer from feeding on your plants is to build an 8-foot high fence around your garden, which I do know is expensive, but it's a surefire way to get rid of deer. Hand-picking insects or larvae from plants is quite effective in reducing pest numbers. Just drop them or knock them off the leaves into a small container of soapy water. You did mention, Jane, that what if you had a plant that had a disease spot on it? Pruning diseased limbs or portions of a plant is another tactic for arresting damage to plants. Be sure to remove all diseased limbs and leaves from the area to prevent spreading spores. This is kind of fun. You can also employ frightening devices to discourage pests from entering your garden. You've seen people put reflective tape on trees in the orchard that blow in the wind. A scarecrow, which is always fun to create. Mind you, you will have to move it from time to time because animals get used to something that doesn't move. A motion sensor sprinkler. Or if you do some exploring on the internet, there's an array of electronic devices that emit sounds or lights to frighten unwanted visitors. I love this one. These inflatable dancers can be used in an orchard to discourage birds from feeding on your crop. You never know what you'll find on the internet. Here are some traditional examples of physical mechanical methods of ridding yourself of slugs. Since this is a frequently asked question, I thought it warranted a page of its own. Slugs and snails love to hide in moist, dark places, especially during the day, and they come out at night to feed on your plants. Beer fall traps like the ones shown here, and be sure and use very, very cheap beer. This is just in a little depressed area, and they hop in because they're drawn to the smell of yeast. It's very satisfying. My neighbor loves to go out with his flashlight when he can't sleep at night and pick up slugs and snails and put them in a soapy water. So hand picking works very well. Also, if you place a board on 2 rocks, you'll be able to harvest some slugs and drop them into soapy water before you have your morning coffee. Also, physically eliminating any dark, moist areas of your garden will help decrease their numbers. More about slugs. This is genius. In 2021, an OSU extension team led by Rory McDonald did research that led to the discovery of fermenting bread dough as an attractant to slugs and snails. You can use it in baited traps like the ones that are pictured right here. McDonald and his team gave slugs and snails they gave them a broad choice of food. They gave them cucumber, lettuce, strawberries, citrus, tomatoes, hostas, and beer, but they consistently went to bread. I especially love this. In one example, over 18,000 snails were trapped in 48 hours. It also appears that in the field studies, the bread dough trap is viable for as long as 8 days, which is a real advantage to gardeners. So all you need to do, mix a cup of flour, a cup of water, a teaspoon of dry yeast, mix them together, let them get bubbly for a few hours inside where it's warm, and then put it in your slug traps. If you make it soupy, they'll drown. But if you make it thick, you can just pick them off as they're eating. Inexpensive and safe for the environment.
Carol, those are really great ideas for physically manage my garden, and I especially like the idea of getting rid of the slugs. But say that didn't work for me, what would be the next step that I might take?
If physical mechanical methods are not making much difference, you can try some biological strategies. Biological methods are often referred to as biocontrols and include beneficial insects, biopesticides, insecticides, and bioherbicides. Let's begin with how beneficial insects can help control garden pests. Beneficial insects are present in a very diverse, healthy home garden. So the more diverse your garden, the more beneficial insects you'll find. They're often really small in size, and they might be mistaken for a harmful insect feeding on your plants. Beneficial insects include predators and parasitoids, and each are effective in lowering the number of pests, insects in your garden. Predator bugs comprise an enormous group of carnivorous insects. They're generalist feeders, and they consume a number of insects such as they like the soft-bodied ones like aphids, leafhoppers, small caterpillars, thrips, and spider mites. And they're characterized by having a syringe-like, needle-like beak. They have large eyes and raptorial front legs for grabbing prey, not unlike T-Rex. Most parasitic insects are flies or wasps. They do not sting people. And their method of killing is by devouring their prey from the inside out. What they do is lay their eggs in or near the host, and the hatching larvae consume the host insect from the inside out. It's kind of diabolical. Parasitic insects are pretty diverse in their appearance and biology and the hosts that they prey upon. And while small in size, they provide control of soft-bodied insects also, aphids, scale insects, leafhoppers, mealybugs, and caterpillars. Unlike the predator insect, though, the parasitic insect will only kill one host at a time, but they still provide important control of pest insects.
Cheryl, I understand about the beneficial insects, but how do I get the beneficial insects into my garden?
Thanks, Jane. This is one of my favorite topics. In order to encourage beneficials in the home garden, You need to provide some food for them and habitat. Many adult predatory and parasitoid insects will feed on nectar and pollen, in addition to feeding on pest insects. They're often small, and so they can't reach the nectar and pollen of very tall plants. So they prefer those little small plants and flowers. Plants that attract them are referred to as insectary plants. By scattering insectary plants throughout the garden and landscape, you can attract those important beneficial insects. And they also work well as a border for your flower beds, and they're beautiful too. Clover is a wonderful one, yarrow, and you know how yarrow will spread. Candy tuft, a nice border plant. Goldenrod is taller. Sunflowers are great, and blue lace, which is lovely. It's lovely to always get blue into your garden. The Garden Ecology Lab at Oregon State University, led by Professor Gail Langolato, conducted a 3-year study to identify Pacific Northwest native plants that support a robust community of insect predators and parasitoids. Their findings indicate 5 plants that hosted an abundance of natural enemies, both predators and parasitoids. The beautiful and long-blooming Douglas aster, goldenrod that pop up bright yellow in your garden, yarrow, which is very easy to keep and maintain, lovely delicates farewell to spring, and pearly everlasting. These plants are native to the Willamette Valley and/or Oregon. Here's a partial list of additional plants that attract predators and parasitoid insects. Remember, the more diversity of plants, the healthier your garden. Don't try to write anything down with this. You will receive a list of resources and a link for this video recording. But the single most greatest impediment to attracting and maintaining a good population of beneficial insects and other arthropods in your backyard is the regular use of synthetic broad-spectrum pesticides. The fewer chemicals you use, the greater and more diverse the beneficial insect population will be. All beneficial insects are susceptible to insecticides. So follow these steps to protect beneficial insects if you must use an insecticide. Choose the least toxic pesticide. Spot spray only on infested plants. Do not spray plants that are in bloom. And spray early in the day when many insects are less active. Research has demonstrated that some elements of native habitat in your landscape will attract native beneficial insects. Native flora also provides overwintering sites for many beneficial insects. I know you can purchase some species of insects at your garden store, ladybugs and praying mantis, but remember, sometimes they harvest those species from distant areas, possibly depleting them in the area in which they were growing and living. And they will also, when you put them in your garden, probably move on, even though you have resources for them. You are far ahead by providing a diversity of plants that will attract insects naturally. Also remember to provide beneficial insects with some water sources. You can build a puddler, which is simply a shallow dish with rocks so that the insects can reach the water easily without drowning. They like muddy spaces just like kids. They get water and nutrients from the native soil.
That is really useful information. I am really impressed with the research done at the Garden Ecology Lab. But Cheryl, I want to ask you something else. I read an article recently about biopesticides and bioherbicides. I didn't know what they are. Can you explain to me in a little bit more detail what that's all about?
Of course. And you're right, they're not as well known. Biopesticides are currently the fastest growing segment of pesticide development, primarily because we're all very concerned about the amount of herbicides and pesticides that are used that are not good for us. Biopesticide is derived from natural sources like bacteria, plant compounds, and fungi. They're formulated to kill insects. Examples that you may be familiar with and probably have used are neem, citrus or eucalyptus eucalyptus oils, as well as common Bt products that are derived from the bacteria Bacillus thuringiensis. I pictured here 2 caterpillars. The one at the top that's brown has been killed by Bt, and the one in the bottom is a normal caterpillar. Bioherbicides are used for weed control, particularly in agriculture, and include things like mustard seed meal, clove, and other herb-based oils. Some have been used to fight plant diseases, but research on the consistency of the result on these products is ongoing, and results vary with the application method, the target problem, and the specific plant being treated. Just remember, any product that ends with the letters ICIDE is a compound intended to kill something, like herbicide, pesticide. Even if it is derived from a natural, organic, botanically derived, or synthetic product. Capsaicin products, for example, are derived from peppers. Well, that's irritating to all mammals. And Bt that we referred to earlier, which we consider to be a good organic control for caterpillars, can also be lethal to desired caterpillars, like those of the monarch butterfly. Just think about your strategy and weigh the pros and cons for your particular garden situation. Biological management can be an effective means of killing harmful pests. One of the biggest challenges of that can be timing. And one example, for example, the brown marmorated stink bug, we all know that it's a bad bug, and it will, like the one you have in your vegetables, Jane, and it will do some damage that you don't desire. Well, the samurai wasp has been an effective parasitoid for this damaging insect. But if the samurai wasp is not present and released at the time, the brown marmorated is not released at the right time, the brown marmorated stink bug may have caused an unacceptable amount of damage already. So timing can be a little bit tricky. I already mentioned that purchasing natural predators often flee your backyard and fail to get you the desired results. So those are kind of the downsides of biological management.
All right. Well, you talked about cultural, physical, and biological controls, but if for some reason none of those work for me, do I have another option?
Absolutely, you do. It's true. Sometimes the physical, mechanical, cultural, and biological methods are just not working. If a pest has been correctly identified and is still a problem after other management strategies have been implemented, then a chemical option may be considered as a last resort. Remember, you're going to select a chemical, whether it's an herbicide, pesticide, or fungicide, that targets your insect, weed, or disease, and avoid the use of any broad spectrum product. That's due to the impact of the broad spectrum on beneficial insects and our greater environment. Wear personal protective gear when mixing and applying chemicals. Select a chemical that has the least impact on the environment. There are organic and synthetic insecticides and herbicides. Try to avoid any that employ neonicotinoids, as they have so directly been shown to be negatively impacting pollinators and other beneficial insects. That means scrutinizing that label. Know exactly what it is that you're buying. Many organic insecticides have a very short window of effectiveness, meaning you may need to apply it multiple times over the growing season. You're going to be monitoring your garden, so you will notice if suddenly things are going awry. Compare that to a conventional pesticide, which may provide a longer protection period when applied only one time. Something to think about. When it comes to application, remember all users are legally required to follow the instructions on the label for the amount and timing. In this case, guys, more of the product will not make the product more effective, and in fact will often do more harm than good. Carefully consider your application method. For example, can you employ a bait station rather than a spray? Will that work for you? Can you spot spray the offending weeds instead of spraying a large area? Chemicals can be effective when used in combination with other integrated pest management tactics. There are some limitations of chemical management. As I mentioned, misuse of pesticides can result in killing of all insects vulnerable to whatever active ingredient it contains. And that will leave only the strongest to mate and reproduce. Well, that results in pests quickly evolving and developing a resistance to chemicals. We've already mentioned the loss of beneficial insects due to pesticide sprays and products containing neonicotinoids, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore here. Pest populations recover more quickly and can cause pest problems to be worse than they were initially. Make sure you apply everything exactly according to the product that you have selected. Pesticide applications can lead to outbreaks of a secondary pest and have an adverse effect on non-target organisms that eat the leaves or the flowers of the plant that is contaminated with the pesticide. And of course, you know that pesticides can be carried into streams by stormwater runoff and cause some unintended consequences to aquatic life. Direct hazards to the user and the secondary exposure of family and friends and pets is an important consideration because pesticide residue does hang around for a bit of time.
Cheryl, that is really a lot of good information. I understand IPM so much better now with all the things that you've talked about, but is there anything else that I should be thinking about?
Yeah, once you've implemented an IPM plan, you must evaluate it. Because biological systems can behave in an unexpected way, check the effectiveness of a plant and a strategy and make changes if you need to. Also, as your landscape changes and plants mature, roots will occupy more area, it will produce more shade, and that will change the relationship between plants and pests. Keep records of pest problems and actions taken and other factors that help inform a pest management strategy in the future. And if you're at all like me, I have a hard time remembering from one year to the next year. If I write it down, I'm far ahead of the game. Understanding IPM provides all gardeners with an earth-friendly approach to pest management. It's flexible, uses an ecosystem approach to management of all pests, plants, diseases, or insect pests. Advanced application of IPM requires that you have a deep understanding of pest and plant biology. And all gardeners, no matter their age or experience, can use IPM with success. Here are some resources from 10-Minute University you may find helpful. And these Oregon State University Extension resources contain valuable information for all home gardeners.
Cheryl, this really gives me a lot to think about, and I'm so glad that this webinar is being recorded so that I can go back and review everything you've talked about and review all the resources. So thank you so much. I learned a lot, Cheryl.
You're so welcome, Jane. Thanks for being with me today to discuss what I think is a pretty important topic for home gardeners. And now we have time for some questions if there are any.
We have a few. Hi there, Cheryl. Hey, I had one of the things, one of the pictures on your slides really kind of brought home to me was at the beginning, and you had a picture of a little caterpillar eating a leaf. And I remember being an inexperienced gardener and thinking, oh, I've got to get rid of that right now. And now when I look at something like that, I think, oh, it's a bird buffet, you know.
Yes,
it's like, what?
For sure.
Go for it, you know. Yeah, so the monitoring thing is really, really important. And talking about that, you mentioned how important monitoring is, and that journaling, keeping a garden journal is really effective. And I know, because I know you, how organized you are, and I know how unorganized I am. And I would love to know what's your process? How do you organize your journal? You know, by date, by plant, by, you know, how do you organize that? Just kind of
that is a really, really good question. I'm kind of old fashioned and I like to write things down. And so I like to keep them in like a regular journal, but I know there are lots of watchers out there that think, well, if I have a computer, why in the world wouldn't I put it on a computer? I try to do it seasonally, like in the spring. Now, it will not only include management strategies I might use, but okay, remember to plant, like for the fall, remember to plant those bulbs that you wanted to have in front of so-and-so. Because I think of it in the spring, but by fall, when I'm ready to plant bulbs, I've forgotten where I wanted to put them or why. And then I can review it, or I can put it forward in the journal. So when that season comes, so I kind of go seasonally. And I have had a couple of bouts of insect pest problems, which were of my own causing because I didn't put the right plant in the right place. Plant was too wet. It made it vulnerable to insect. As soon as I moved that plant to another space, it was much happier, and I no longer had that pest problem. So I think sometimes I can be my own worst enemy, but I do kind of I keep mine seasonally, but you might do it by sections of you could even do it by yard sections, like in the front of the garage to the side of the house. So you know your flower beds and what are in them.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I will try and do that. I think that's a great idea. One of the first questions we had was someone has a real problem with yellow jackets in their yard, a problem with people and pets. And is there something that you'd like to recommend for that?
This is always kind of an emotional topic for people because nobody likes getting stung by bees, and certainly I don't. If the yellow jacket nest is in the ground in my main yard, I make sure I avoid that space because they're most active and nasty in the fall because the queen is going to move on, the nest is going to be abandoned, all those bees are going to die, and they're going to find another place, hopefully not in my yard, to be. So I just avoid the space. And I know people say, well, every time I mow, I get stung when I go past a certain space. There are sprays you can use, which last resort. I mean, if somebody in your home has an allergy to bees, stings, obviously that's a different level of concern than me, who I'm not allergic to bee stings. If I can avoid the area, I avoid the area, and I do not disturb the nest. I let it nature take its own course. But there are sprays that can be used if you're in a situation where it's in a very, like right beside your slider as you go out into the backyard. That's one of their favorite places. If you have someone in your home who is really susceptible to bees, you have a problem and probably need to think of a way to eliminate them. And there are sprays available for that, but last resort.
Just to be noticed, most bees do not sting, but
That's
yellow
true.
jackets do.
And they can be, nasty. I mean,
Yes, yeah. I actually was looking up this question for a neighbor of mine, and one of the things from OSU, the publication is How to Get Rid of Yellow Jackets. And one of the things that they recommend is putting out a yellow jacket trap,
right,
but early in the spring, so that the queen will go there and reduce the number of yellow jackets in the yard.
An excellent strategy.
Which I thought that was, but when you put a trap, put it away from your area that you're going to be in, put it as far away from the house or where you're going to be recreating as possible so that they're attracted that way and not toward the house. So.
And particularly that space where you go out to have your barbecue, your dinner. And those traps are a very good strategy. Okay. Thank you for bringing it up.
No, I just found it this week, so I thought I'd share it. What's the most effective way to eliminate squash bugs? Was another question we had.
Oh, that is a problem, squash bugs. Trying to use cultural methods such as floating row cover so that squash bugs don't get going to start with. Remember, preventative, and make sure don't plant. If you have had trouble with squash bugs in a certain area, don't put squash there again. You need to put them in a different area because squash bugs will look for them there else also. I do know that you can handpick them. I don't have a magic bullet for squash bugs, but I do think trying to put up barriers to prevent them from reaching your plants is a viable option.
Okay.
By the way, someone just mentioned, I'm sorry to interrupt you, as we were talking about yellow jackets, we should have made clear that yellow jackets are a wasp, not a bee. So That's why they're so nasty, because they're not nice like
They're
these.
not nice bees. Okay, any good ways to deal with leaf miners? We tried picking off infected leaves, but just can't seem to keep ahead of them. Do you have suggestions for
That
that?
is, have you, I wonder if they, well, I'm gonna say again, floating row cover to protect those plants, to protect the flub bug from getting in to your plants to start with, but obviously they've already been there. So think about strategies that you can employ this year when you, before you plant, they get leaf miner, or did she say she already has leaf miner and she's already, would she make that
Yes,
clear?
yeah, she says she has had problems in the past.
In the past, yeah. So
Yeah.
think about how to eliminate leaf miner in the future, planting in a different space maybe, and then try row cover to see if you can't keep them from reaching your plant before they get going.
Okay,
Prevention.
yeah,
And if
Okay.
that didn't adequately answer her question, please send it to 10-minute you 2017@gmail.com and I will answer it more fully for you.
and that's a good thing for all of our people who have questions.
Yeah,
is-
you
is
feel like
if we
it's not
don't get to-
answered.
Yeah, just write us and we'll get back to you. Okay, here's a problem that I experience is ants getting, and it's a question from somebody else in Seattle too, having ant problems, and they take up residence and build nests underneath the plant pots.
Okay, we're gonna
Or-
have to, somehow I missed the first part of that question. Can you start
Oh,
that?
sorry. Questions about dealing with ants. So
Oh, yeah.
ants make nests underneath the plant pots, or, I mean, sometimes I've had a big thing of soil in my driveway and put a shovel in and there's ants everywhere.
Uh-huh.
Specifically the plant pots and underneath the plant pots, what's a good way to deal with that?
It's the moisture that they're drawn to. So I sort of think if you put, like pots that I have, I always put feet.
Or little pot feet.
Pot
Yeah.
feet. And so it raises them up, air circulates. It's better for my patio. I don't have a ring in my patio. And it seems to keep the potato bugs and the ants from residing there. They're kind of going there for moisture and
Mm.
as far, usually, I guess this is what I do is they don't bother me very much if they're not really impacting the health of my plants. And I often find them in the driveway, they seem to hatch out and be very, very active, but they move on very, very quickly. So if you can, a viable strategy there is to just let the problem play out,
Yeah,
unless they're affecting something negatively.
that's a good point. Yeah. Okay. All righty. I think that is, let me check real quick here. Oh, the email address for the questions. Did you get
Is
it read down?
10-minute you 2017@gmail.com, or it's the same email as your link for this webinar.
Okay. I think that is about it for our questions today. Again, if you come up with something that you didn't get answered, or you would, think of,
We want to hear from you if you got
Yeah,
a question. that
think of
wasn't
in the
answered.
next couple of hours, go ahead and write us. And it
I
would
know
be-
IPM isn't a very sexy topic, but it's a necessary topic. And we want to be nice to the environment and also get rid of things that are eating our plants.
Yeah, I think, in a way, it's taking care of the earth. We're stewarding our plants in the earth, and I think that's a pretty sexy topic. So
I think so
like it.
too.
Sounds good. Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much. It was
Thanks,
a wonderful,
Leah.
and thank you, Jane, if you're still around.
Yep,
We
Jane,
love
thanks for
having you
helping.
there. Yes.